Hello, my friends. It's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Yesterday, we started talking about the report of these guards who became exactly the opposite of what the religious leaders wanted them to be, which was reliable witnesses to the things which had occurred at the tomb. And they come back and they're telling the religious leaders about all of this. That begs lots of questions, like why are you going to the religious leaders instead of to your military superiors? And what are you hoping happens here? And what are the consequences for you not getting this one simple task right? You had one job, is just guard it, make sure that dead guy stayed dead and right there, and you blew it. What are these guards thinking? What is the culture like in which they live? What kind of pressures are they under? And how is that going to affect the way this story plays out? We're going to look at that stuff today, picking up where we left off yesterday. At this time, I'd like to invite my dear, dear friend Jeffrey to play some music, and then we'll get back to it. Why wouldn't they communicate to Pilate or one of the centurions who they answer to? Well, the reason is because they'd be risking massive punishment. What kind of punishment? Like, you're going to read a lot of books about the resurrection and stuff where people speak with certainty. They're like, oh, this would be the punishment every time in the first century AD. My digging around indicates that punishment might be more diverse, might be more at the discretion of a centurion, but it wouldn't be friendly, ranging somewhere between a horribly dishonorable discharge and even being stripped of rank and property, ranging up to physical punishment, ranging all the way up to maybe even death. The ancient sources aren't as unified on this as would be nice, but it is a very big army that covered the whole world and it spans a big amount of time. It would make sense that there maybe wouldn't be one neat, tidy answer. What I can say is this: every answer I can find as to what sort of fate these guys would be facing, to go back and admit that they screwed this up, it's all bad. None of it is something they would have wanted. All of it would have changed their lives, maybe even ended it. So think about what's happening here. I think they're going to the religious leaders first because they're like, what do we do? Like, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think he came back to life. There's no evidence that the body was stolen. We were there and catatonic, but like, this is the stuff we caught. Remember, it says that they reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. They knew what was going on. And I think they're hoping that these people who they have discovered to be politically highly motivated to get rid of this Jesus thing, I think they're trying to make a deal with the devil here. There's no chance that our Roman superiors are going to play along and be tolerant and patient with what just happened. They're not going to believe this narrative. I mean, maybe that one centurion who was a part of the execution squad would. Maybe. He said surely he's a son of God, but they don't know that. And so I think they're going to try and strike a bargain. And a bargain, as we see, is what they end up getting. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, you're to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. We know from Josephus, and I've covered it several times, so I'm not going to go back and revisit it right now, but we know from Josephus, Pilate has had so many fumbling, I'm a real boy, look, I made good policy decision, total public disasters that undermine his credibility. It just keeps happening. He keeps embarrassing himself. He keeps eroding his own standing here. And as I was talking about earlier on in the conversation about this passage, he's not on firm standing. He's beleaguered. Things are not good back in Rome. He does not come from a powerful family. He does not have support, and that factors heavily into his decision-making. He's playing for his political life, maybe his life. Indeed, there are traditions that say he went back, reported this stuff, or intended to report this stuff to Tiberius. Tiberius died while Pilate is being recalled a few years later from his position here, but ultimately Pilate is forced to either be executed or take his own life. Now, is that actually what happened? Well, there are a lot of competing theories about what actually happened, but that one fits within the precarious situation Pilate is subjected to. The point being, these religious leaders had dirt, they had opportunity. Pilate wasn't even the Roman sovereign in the region. Ultimately, it's a more powerful Roman governor, a more politically established Roman governor in Syria who comes in as like, hey, home office, it might be time to recall this Pontius Pilate guy. Things are not going well in Judea. Without that historical context, it might be easy to look at this passage and be like, ooh, it looks like maybe Matthew made a mistake in his details here. Rome are the occupiers. Rome are the ones with the armies and the power. These religious leaders, they can't make Pilate do anything, but with a little bit of knowledge of what was actually going on in the moment, we can in fact point to 4 different times when these religious leaders exerted private or public pressure to make Pilate bend the knee to their preferences because of Pilate's greatest fear, that being demonstrating that he could not maintain order in this place and that he would be undercut and relegated back to a life of rather modest means in the middle class from which he stunningly arose just a few years earlier. And I think it's reasonable to imagine that members of the Legion, the soldiers around here, kind of knew. You know how you work at places sometimes and you're not really in charge of anything. You're kind of low man, low woman on the totem pole, but you got eyes and you got ears and you can look at the thing and say, yeah, I know who's actually in charge around here. We have an on-paper structure, but everybody knows what the dynamic is. It's not very healthy, maybe even a little bit toxic. And you know who the real power brokers are. I think these guys knew who the real power brokers were. That being the guards knew. And I think that's why they went to the real power brokers to strike, or in the hopes of striking exactly the kind of deal that they ultimately were able to strike here. But all the way back to the grill thing and washing it out. And the point being that I want to get the grill squeaky clean. And instead, it all just boomerangs back on me. And now I got egg, or it's not really egg. It's more meat chunks and oddly solidified gelatinous meat extract just blasted all over my face and my shirt. So likewise, they set up this whole scheme back in chapter 27 to make it so that nobody could claim some sort of reliable witness account that Jesus was raised from the dead. It boomerangs entirely because what they did is they ended up putting reliable third-party witnesses there who saw it or saw it well enough to report what had happened. And now there are eyewitnesses to the resurrection. Exactly what the religious leaders didn't want. Fortunately for the religious leaders, these were people who were afraid enough of their superiors and afraid enough of the consequences of what had happened, outsiders enough to it to not really care one way or the other than just, I don't want to get in trouble, that they could be bought. Now, I mentioned a couple days ago when we were first getting to this passage, the contrast between the buying of Judas, who sells everything out for a really disappointingly low price, versus these guys who are given a, quote, large sum of money. You got to remember, Matthew's going to have feelings about Judas, and I think he's been rather restrained in writing about Judas. I think Jesus' attitude toward Judas has rubbed off on Matthew. Matthew's adopted that. Matthew's thinking about the Judas thing, I think, through kingdom values lenses in his writing. Matthew isn't piling on even Peter for doing stupid stuff. He's not even really piling on Judas. He's just pretty matter of fact about what happened, and what happened isn't very flattering for Judas. But think about it if you're Matthew. Like 3 years road tripping with these guys and all the relational dynamics that go on, the weird stuff. And it might not have been perfect, but ultimately it's like the best 3 years anybody will ever have of anybody at any point in history, because you're with the maker of all things and he gets everything right and he's investing in you. I mean, this was pure magic. This wasn't like a week of camp where it was really good and the songs were cool and that girl was dreamy and I just had a super big crush. This is massive. This is a level of relational, cherished time wonder years that no one can relate to. And then Judas kind of wrecks it. He sells it out. It didn't mean much to Judas. And so to you and me, we see the Jesus thing. We don't feel Judas the same way. Matthew must have felt that Judas betrayal big time. And I detect just a little bit in the way Matthew handles the story of Judas and points out exactly how much the money was. Granted, that also involved fulfillment of prophecy on a couple of different levels as we looked at. But I think Matthew could have skipped the detail about how much these guys got for their dishonesty, false witnessing, and betraying, but he leaves it in there. It's kind of like one more little twist of the knife for Judas. Like, it's a total tragedy. He sold out everything that was good and beautiful and right, and he was so unsophisticated and unshrewd, he couldn't even get a good price for it. Even these Gentile outsiders were able to understand how valuable Jesus was and how valuable the story surrounding him was. At least they had the good sense to get paid. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe that's not Matthew's intent, but I don't think it's an unfair thing to extrapolate from the text, even if it wasn't intended. Sometimes I sit down and I'm like, let's just do all of this. Let's do it at once. We're going to get this in one conversation. We're going to keep it within that 10-ish minutes of like actual content kind of time frame. And then it just gets super interesting and I get to having fun. And I'm like, no, I want to look at this angle too. And then this other angle. And then it turns out to be like 2 or 3 days of us talking about this one passage in one sitting. And that's what you're getting right now. So I'm going to hit pause here and we're going to pick it up and continue to look at the implications of what is going on in this passage and effectively this fork in the road. There's pressure here. It has to be resolved. People just, they can't all come around. It would be absolutely devastating to their case and their reputation. They've literally shed blood now. They can't just come back and be like, oopsies. Oh, we made a mistake. Okay, some guards told us a thing. Turns out he is the Son of God. He was right all along. He has come back to life. Everyone should follow Jesus now. They can't do that collectively as a body. They should, but they can't. So that means there has to be a competing story. You got to find something to do with it. And as we've read here in Matthew 28, 11 through 15, that something is this elaborate lie that his scattered, cowardly disciples somehow overpowered these Roman guards, moved that big tomb, and got out of there, and the guards are somehow still alive. Okay, we'll explore the merits of that tomorrow and in the ensuing days. Quick change of pace here. Back in the day, we printed out little notebooks that fit in your hip pocket that have the TMBH logo, and they say Matthew on the front. And I sent them to everybody who was supporting the podcast at that time. And I continue to think those are just the niftiest. They're useful. You can jot things down. If you're working through the book with somebody else, you can write down questions or thoughts or whatever. And then when you have time to sit down and get coffee, you can compare notes on all of that. And it hits, it goes in your hip pocket. It's like we're trying to get books of the Bible in our hip pocket, remember? So I think that's just great. And I printed out 2 new ones. One for the upcoming series that starts January 2nd, where we're going through the whole Bible, 1 book of the Bible per day until we're done. And I also printed out new little notebooks that are for the book of Esther, which is what we're going to do after we're done with that through the whole Bible series. Everybody who's supporting right now at any level, I'm going to send one of those to. If you want to jump in, this would definitely be the week to do that. As you may recall, there's a few different ways to support the program. Anybody who's supporting in any way in any of those different manners, Patreon, Planning Center, all visible through thetmbh.com/support. We're going to do our very best to get all of you one of these. A way that you could help me out would be to update those addresses. Every time we do a mailing like this, we get a bunch of them back. So if you could just make sure it's really dialed and it's the way the post office likes it, it gives us the best chance of making sure that these 2 books get to you that I'm very, very excited to share because I think it really does add to the whole effect. And I think you'll enjoy them and get good use out of them. And I'm thankful to you. And I want to communicate that by sending these to you. So thank you for checking those addresses. Thank you to everyone who is supporting. Matt, this is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.